Welcome to Watches with Dennis, and today I want to talk about the new King Seiko collection that Seiko has revealed. It's 5 watches, and it's kind of a play on the design from the King Seiko vintage era, where King Seiko and Grand Seiko were sort of the pioneering side of Seiko, trying to match the Swiss in terms of performance on their wristwatches. So let's go ahead and go through these and some of the specifications that we know about.
There are 5 references. All of them, though, are stainless steel cases that are 37 millimeters in diameter. There's a 42.5 millimeter lug-to-lug distance. The lug width on the watches is 19 millimeters, and the thickness is 12.1 millimeters. The caseback is a screw down. The crown is not a screw down. However, both the caseback and the crown do feature a new logo representing King Seiko that is supposed to have been inspired by the 1965 model. The strap is also supposed to be paying homage to the design of the original King Seiko series. So it's, as you can see, very beveled. It's a pretty unique looking bracelet. I find it quite intriguing. Unfortunately, it doesn't appear to taper very much, but nonetheless, it's an interesting look. The index and hands of the watch are interesting. So we have the faceted lugs with sharp angles. In a way, it kind of reminds me of what I sort of expect to see out of Grand Seiko. I do notice the 12 o'clock, though, has this interesting sort of textured look to it, and it's also significantly wider than the other indices to make it easy to identify. No lume on the dial, which I think makes sense given that I've always associated King Seiko as a more dressy sort of watch. In terms of dial text, we have the applied Seiko logo up towards the 12 o'clock position, and then towards the 6 o'clock position, there's the King Seiko branding, and then a notation that it is automatic. They did not run with a manual wind, which a lot of historic King Seikos are associated with, but rather an automatic. In this case, I believe they are using the Seiko automatic 6R31, which is a 24 joule, 3 hertz movement with a 70-hour power reserve. Water resistance on the watches is noted as being 100 meters. And in terms of options for dial colors, there are 5. So there's the silver dial, a light gray dial, and I think both of those to me really feel like the sort of the traditional historic vintage King Seiko look. But there's also a charcoal gray, a brown, and a red, which is a pretty bold look. It kind of reminds me of something you might see out of Orient, which is kind of a sister company to Seiko. Seiko does control majority stake in Orient. And so the only other thing I would note is they went with a boxed sapphire crystal on the watches, and the underside, I believe, is anti-reflective coating. All 5 of the reference numbers are listed at $1,700 US and also 1,700 euro for that matter in terms of pricing, and they are supposed to be available very soon at some point in February. Well, I've mostly looked at images of the bracelet. There are 5 strap types that are in their sort of strap generator over at the Seiko website. One of them is a gray artificial suede. The remaining 4 are all calf leather, and they come in either dark brown, regular brown, black, or gray.
So in terms of final thoughts, this is not a lineup I'm really interested in, even though I actually like a lot of the design motif. I actually have looked into King Seiko watches before on Chrono 24 in terms of possibly picking up a vintage watch. I've read online some people seem a little bothered that these are automatic movement watches rather than manual wind. That's not my main issue. I actually like a lot about the design choices here. I think overall these are really good upgrades. I think the dials, the text on the dials actually looks better than what I remember seeing on the ones I looked at from that sort of 60s era. But I'm bothered by a couple of things. One is very, very minor because they noted there are a number of leather strap options that you could consider. The bracelet, I think, looks really cool, but I'm not sure it's going to be comfortable. It kind of reminds me of Zenith with their throwback revival watches where they did the ladder bracelet, and I like the ladder bracelet, but I don't know if it's a really comfortable bracelet. From what I had read, it's not. These bracelets don't seem to taper very much. And generally speaking, it seems people typically prefer a bracelet that tapers. So I don't know. It might be fine. I would want to try it on the bracelet though, rather than getting a leather strap from the get-go if I were to get one of these. But my biggest issue actually is the movement. Now, as I noted, I don't really care that it's an automatic movement versus just a manual wind. My problem is when I've looked for King Seiko watches, I went in with a very specific mindset. And the thing I associated with King Seiko back in the day, more so than Grand Seiko, was high beat movements. So we're talking 5 hertz movements that could do to a 1/10 of a second accuracy. They weren't designed as, chronographs or anything like that. But it was just, I was really interested in adding a high beat movement, 5 hertz watch to my collection. I still have never had one, but King Seiko seemed like a pretty approachable way to get access to it. So I look at this and I see that they ran with a 3 hertz movement. So I get it from a dress watch perspective. I mean, you reduce maintenance, you can get a longer power reserve with a lower power level. But it seems to be what they've been using, I guess, in their Presage line. And, it seems some people think maybe this is just a different kind of dial and case design motif for Presage, but there's not really that much in the way of a difference. Regardless, for me, given that they did not go in on high beat, I wouldn't pay $1,700 for this sort of watch, with a 3 hertz movement like this. Dress watches can have a 3 hertz movement, but the thing is, there are, at least last I looked, pretty readily accessible and readily affordable vintage King Seikos on the market. So my take is that if you're really interested in the King Seiko design, but you don't want the hassle or the worry about what comes along with a vintage movement in terms of water resistance or, maintenance that it might need, I could see going for this. But at, they're listed retail at $1,700 US, for a movement like this that doesn't rate all that great. I'm comparing it to things like the Tudor 1926, which I believe MSRP is around $2,000 with a lot more accurate movement than what these are tagged as. So I just think there's too much competition for me to ever want to go in on something like this simply because I really am a fond person of this dial design from the King Seiko era. Just doesn't strike the main thing I want, which is a 5 hertz movement. And I'm sure there's no way they would deliver us a 5 hertz movement below $2,000 US, but I'd be willing to be surprised. So anyway, that's it for this episode. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a like. It does help out. And if you want to be notified when I have new videos, just click the subscribe button. And otherwise, everybody, have a great day.